Hello, everyone, and welcome to another thrilling episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights. My name is Timothy, and I'm joined, as always, by my longtime friend and eternal cinephile, Thomas. And today we have quite the treat for you all. We're going to be discussing a film that has been on my list for some time now. One that has been, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Thomas, how are you doing today?
Hey, all right, Timothy dearest. As fine as can be expected when I know we're about to discuss another one of your historical dramas. But let's talk about the film, shall we? What do you have in store for us tonight?
We're watching The Roommate from 2011, Tom. A thriller that I think you will find quite entertaining.
Oh, yes. I remember now. The one with Leighton Meester and Minka Kelly. Hey, you know what, Timothy? I actually quite liked it. It had a good plot twist at the end, don't you agree?
Well, Tom, I must say that I am a bit disappointed by your choice of words. Liked is a bit generous, wouldn't you say? It was more of endurance test than anything else.
Now, Timothy dearest, we agreed to disagree on films. Besides, I think it has a solid 8 out of 10 stars from me.
Well, Thomas, I can't say that I share your enthusiasm for this masterpiece of a film. In fact, I'd give it a measly 2 out of 10 stars. It was boring and predictable with cardboard-thin characters and an even more predictable plot.
Oh, now, Tim, you're just being... Well, Timothy, it had some suspenseful moments, some good acting from the cast, and a decent storyline, in my opinion. What was it that specifically rubbed you the wrong way?
Thomas, I think we can agree on one thing at least. Leighton Meester and Minka Kelly did put on a decent performance. However, that's about the only positive thing I can say about this film. The plot was predictable from the moment the two main characters first met, the supposed twist at the end. Mm-hmm. I saw it coming from a mile away. And as for the supporting cast, they might as well have been cardboard cutouts. There was no depth to their characters at all.
Now, Timothy dearest, you're being a bit harsh. The film was meant to be a thriller, and it did manage to keep me on edge for most of the runtime. And as I mentioned earlier, the acting was solid, especially from Meester and Kelly. Plus, they managed to create some suspenseful moments that made me question what would happen next.
Well, Thomas, we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one then. But since we are discussing the film, I do remember there being something about the production of The Roommate that caught my attention. What was it, Tom? Something about the director and his previous work, wasn't it?
Oh, right. Christiansen directed this one, and he's known for his horror films, like The House That Haunted Itself and Hellhound. I always thought it was an interesting choice to have him helm a thriller like The Roommate. Do you think the horror influences crept into the film?
Well, Thomas, I'd say they crept in quite heavily, wouldn't you? There were moments during the film where I honestly thought we were watching a poorly disguised slasher flick rather than a thriller. But anyway, back to my question about trivia. What interesting fact about the production of The Roommate would you like to share with our viewers tonight?
Oh, well, I did a bit of research before we started recording tonight, and I found out something rather interesting about the film's production. You know how I mentioned earlier that Christiansen is known for his horror films? Well, apparently, he originally wanted to make The Roommate into a full-fledged horror flick.
Really? And what made them change their minds and turn it into a thriller instead?
I'm glad you asked, Timothy dearest. According to the director himself, he was forced by the studio to tone down the horror elements and make it more of a suspenseful thriller to appeal to a wider audience. So, we could have ended up with an even scarier version of The Roommate than what we got.
Well, I, for one, grateful they made that decision, Tom. As it stands, the film was frightening enough for me. But moving on, do you recall anything else about the production trivia? Something about the casting process, perhaps?
Oh, yes. I almost forgot. So, during the casting process, Leighton Meester and Minka Kelly reportedly had to go through some intense auditioning. They both impressed the director with their performances, but it was their chemistry that ultimately sealed the deal for the roles of Sarah and Morgan.
Well, I suppose they did have a decent on-screen relationship, although I would argue it stemmed more from the lackluster writing than anything else. But moving on, do you remember any other interesting tidbits about the Roommates production?
Well, Timothy dearest, I'd like to talk about the direction a bit. Christiansen did a decent job of building suspense and creating tension between the two main characters. Sarah and Morgan, the use of close-up shots and slow zoom-outs added to the eerie atmosphere throughout the film. However, I do agree with you that there were moments where the horror elements crept in a bit too much, making it borderline cheesy at times. But overall, I think he managed to balance the thriller and suspense elements well.
Well, Thomas, I can appreciate the effort put into building tension between Sarah and Morgan. I still stand by my earlier statement that the film was predictable from start to finish. The supposed twist at the end, anyone with a passing knowledge of thriller tropes could have guessed it minutes before it happened. And as for the horror elements creeping in, I'd say they stumbled and fell face first into cliche-filled mud puddle. But moving on, let's talk about the performances. Leighton Meester portrayed Sarah quite well, transitioning convincingly from a shy and reserved student to an obsessed stalker. However, I found Minka Kelly's portrayal of Morgan to be rather one-dimensional, lacking in depth and nuance. She was either happy-go-lucky or terrified, with little room for anything in between.
Now we're talking about the performances. I agree with you, Timothy dearest. Leighton Meester did an excellent job of portraying Sarah's descent into madness. But I must defend Minka Kelly's performance as Morgan just a bit. She had a pretty straightforward character to work with. The naive and innocent college girl who is unaware of the danger lurking right next door. But moving on, let's talk about some of the supporting cast members. Gigandet played the role of Trevor, Sarah's boyfriend, and I thought he did a decent job of portraying a loving and concerned partner who starts to suspect something is off with Sarah. Danneel Harris played Mrs. Potter, Morgan's mother, and she brought a much-needed sense of groundedness to the film. Lanter also played a small role as Derek, one of Morgan's friends, and he did an adequate job of portraying a typical college frat boy with no real depth or complexity. Now, Timothy dearest, what are your thoughts on the performances? Any particular standouts or disappointments for you?
Well, Thomas dearest, I must admit that Leighton Meester did an admirable job portraying Sarah's descent into madness. She convincingly conveyed the character's growing obsession with her roommate, Minka Kelly's Morgan. However, I must agree with you about Minka Kelly's performance as Morgan. While she did a decent job portraying the naive and innocent college girl initially, I wish there had been more nuance and depth to her character development throughout the film. She seemed to be trapped in two extreme emotions, happiness or terror, with little room for anything else. As for Gigandet's performance as Trevor, Sarah's boyfriend, he did a decent job of portraying a loving and concerned partner who starts to suspect something is off with Sarah. However, his character was rather one-dimensional, serving mostly as the voice of reason and concern for Sarah's behavior. Danneel Harris as Mrs. Potter, Morgan's mother, brought much-needed groundedness to the film with her performance. She played the role of a concerned parent who cares deeply about her daughter, but also knows when to let go and allow them to learn from their mistakes. Lanter also portrayed Derek, one of Morgan's friends, adequately enough. He did his job as a typical college frat boy with no real depth or complexity, which was fitting for the role he was casted in. Overall, while there were some standout performances, most notably Leighton Meester's portrayal of Sarah, the overall acting in The Roommate was average at best. Now, Thomas Dearest, let me ask you a question about cultural impact of this film. Since it was released back in 2011, how has it stood the test of time? Do you think it still holds up today, or has it been overshadowed by more modern thrillers?
Well, Timothy, dearest, it's difficult to say how well The Roommate has held up over time, since I recently rewatched it myself for today's episode. However, looking at the cultural impact it had upon its release in 2011, it did manage to generate a fair amount of buzz and controversy. Some praised it for tackling issues like stalking and obsession head-on, while others criticized it for glorifying the very thing it claimed to be warning against. As for its relevance today, I'd argue that the themes portrayed in The Roommate remain timeless. The idea of trust being violated by someone you once considered a friend is something many people can relate to, whether it's from real-life experiences or stories they've heard. Additionally, the use of technology as a tool for surveillance and manipulation is more prevalent than ever before, making the film's portrayal of such themes all the more pertinent. That being said, the horror elements might come off as dated compared to modern-day thrillers, but I believe that the core story of obsession and the lengths people will go for, love or whatever twisted version of it they're chasing, is still relevant today. So in my humble opinion, The Roommate, while not without its flaws, does hold up well enough to be enjoyed by audiences who appreciate a good thriller with a touch of horror. Now, Timothy dearest, do you agree? Or perhaps you have some...
Well, Thomas Dearest, while I can appreciate the film's attempts at tackling themes like obsession and trust violation, I still stand by my earlier assessment that The Roommate is an average thriller at best. Its predictability and cliché-filled plot twists are a stain on an otherwise promising premise. However, as we've discussed, Leighton Meester's performance as Sarah was indeed commendable, and the film does hold some cultural significance in its portrayal of stalking and obsession. As for Minka Kelly's portrayal of Morgan, while she did have a somewhat one-dimensional character to work with, I wish there had been more nuance and depth to her character development throughout the film. In conclusion, The Roommate is an average thriller that delivers some decent thrills but ultimately falls short of greatness. While it does tackle relevant themes and issues, its predictability and reliance on cliché hinder it from reaching its full potential. However, if you're looking for a mindless thrill ride with a few jump scares sprinkled in, then this may be the film for you. But please leave your doors and windows locked tight afterward. So, dear viewers, what did you think of The Roommate?
Did you find it as predictable and cliché-filled as I did?
Or maybe you thought it was a thrilling ride filled with suspense and jump scares. Let us know in the comments section down below.
Remember to subscribe.
And share this video with your friends and loved ones. And until next time, stay safe out there, folks.